We'll get started. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. My name is Cathi Choi. I'm the Executive Director of Women Cross DMZ. Some housekeeping for this evening. We will hear from all three speakers, Paul Lim, Youngmi Cho, Dae-Han Song. I'll moderate a brief conversation, and then we'll take some questions from the audience at the end. So you can see a Q&A function at the bottom of your screens. You can also send questions in the chat. So please use either function to send questions to the panelists throughout the presentation, and Solby, Lim, and I will collect them and we'll moderate some questions at the end. Oh, so here we have Paul. Okay, great. So today we're here to discuss the Lee-Trump summit. Last Monday, US President Donald Trump and South Korean President Lee Jae-myung met in their first ever summit in Washington, D.C. Lee Jae-myung notably urged Donald Trump to be a, quote, peacemaker while pledging to act as the pacemaker in efforts to engage North Korea. The two discussed prospects for renewed dialogue with Pyongyang, but notably, neither leader discussed denuclearization, the key issue named by Kim Jong Un's sister, Kim Yo-jong, in determining whether North Korea would engage the US in dialogue. President Lee Jae-myung has vowed to ease tensions and restore diplomacy with North Korea. In response, North Korean leadership, however, has rebuffed Lee Jae-myung, stating that South Korea, quote, cannot be a diplomatic partner of North Korea. Lee's administration has also proposed transferring from the US to South Korea wartime operational control of troops on the Korean Peninsula in the next at least in South Korea in the next 5 years. This week, US Congress also returns from August recess, and in the coming days, the House will vote on the National Defense Authorization Act. In July, the Senate Armed Forces Service Committee passed NDA language which did two things. One, prohibiting the spending on the reduction of US troops in South Korea, which is currently at 28,500. And two, banning the transfer of wartime operational control of South Korean troops from the US to South Korea. This was significant because it marked the first time that the NDAA has included language regarding banning wartime operational control transfer, and the first time in 5 years that the NDAA has prohibited troop reduction in Korea. Needless to say, these coming weeks represent a critical time. So I'm thrilled to be joined tonight by three speakers who will help us see beyond the spectacle of summitry and look deeply at the substance of what was said, what was omitted, and what we can expect moving forward. So I'll introduce each of the three speakers now. Paul Lim is the chair of the Korea Policy Institute. He has been an analyst, commentator, and activist for over 40 years on US-Korea relations. He has visited North Korea in 3 different decades. Thank you, Paul, for joining us today from California. Next, we have Youngmi Cho. Youngmi is the executive committee member of the Christian Conference of Asia, former executive director of the Korean Women's Movement for Peace, the deputy director of trans education at the Peace Institute of PeaceMOMO, which is the peace education organization. Youngmi is normally based in South Korea, but is very graciously joining us today from Germany, where it is about 2 a.m. So thank you so much, Youngmi. Finally, we have Dae-Han Song, who is with the International Strategy Center in charge of the content teams there. The ISC builds bridges between social movements in Korea and abroad. He is also part of the No Cold War Collective and an associate of the Korea Policy Institute. In 2007, he also traveled to North Korea as a member of Nododo's DPRK Education and Exposure Program. So I'll first turn it to Paul for some remarks.
Thank you. Thanks, Cathi, for having me. Last week, President Lee came to Washington, was hosted by Trump at a summit meeting to discuss ostensibly, the future of the alliance, the prospects for reunification, denuclearization. Lee came with an offer of an investment package in an effort to blunt some of Trump's threats to impose high tariffs on Korean exports to the United States, 25%. And he also came to, actually, on everybody's mind has been what will be the future of United States forces in Korea. That actually was not something that the two leaders discussed together, was something that will happen at a later time. This week, however, Xi Jinping in China has just hosted Modi from India, along with Putin from Russia at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And tomorrow he'll be standing on the podium flanked by Mr. Putin and Kim Jong Un, watching the Liberation Day parade in China. And then on Friday, Putin will be hosting the um, Eastern Economic Forum in Vladivostok. So these are multitudes of leaders in different parts of the world that are coming together and in these multilateral diplomatic forums in China. The events of these 2 weeks, I think, should be looked at together for their contrast. In the case of Xi, his diplomatic offensive, his message has essentially been, let's come together and let's form a new kind of global protocol where we treat each other with respect and try to find ways to develop mutually beneficial relationships. Um, in contrast, the President Trump has taken the approach of holding bilateral meetings with leaders around the world. Um, these leaders are coming to Washington essentially upon the threat of um, high tariffs being imposed by President Trump. And they essentially are coming to the United States um, pleading for some leniency in what is essentially this economic bullying strategy that the Trump administration has taken. So these two approaches are very much um, what has become, what is coming to define um, two geopolitical blocks, developing political blocks. One um, among countries of the global South, excluding Western countries, and then the US NATO alliance and US Japan Korea alliance and the US Japan Philippine alliance and the Quad alliance and so forth. So it places, it does put, I think, the accomplishments of President Lee's visit to Washington in some perspective, in that it does pose the question, is Trump the only way? Is the way forward for Korea, is it truly the U.S. ROC alliance? Is it truly the U.S. Japan ROC alliance? And so, from President Lee's point of view and position, the positions he's taken, is he is still very much hitched the fate of South Korea's foreign policy, its economic relations, and so forth the um, to the will of the United States. And what was accomplished by Lee, I think, in Washington was that he was very successful in assuring the Trump administration that his policies would be in alignment with U.S. policies, both economically and also in relationship to North Korea. Um, the problem is that the Trump administration's um, outlook towards its allies, including Korea, essentially, you're there to make America great again. So the question is really, I think, what does um, Korea, the Lee administration, get from this summit? So I just want to talk a little bit about this economic package that President Lee brought with him to offer the Trump administration, the $350 billion investment package to make America great again from Trump's point of view, but also um, to to ensure a continuation of the economic relations with the United States between the United States and Korea. The package that Lee brought is the investment package is really um, mostly loan guarantees, which means that South Korean companies will borrow money from commercial banks and invest that money in the United States. Now, the commercial banks will be backstopped by the state banks. Um, that is the loan guarantee. So if the loans are not, if the South Korean companies who have taken out these loans are not able to repay the loans, then the state banks will intervene and they will make the loan payments on behalf of those companies. The the idea is to minimize the risk to South Korean companies um, because if their investments in the United States fall short and they're not able to um, make the payments on their loans, the state will come in and make the payments for them. The money that actually the state will come in to pay these loans will be the people's money. It will be the public money. So the backstop to this entire package really is South Korean taxpayers um, and all the revenues and fees and interest collected by the South Korean government. The what South Korea really needs in order for this to be successful is they have to be able to ensure that the investments that are being made by South Korean companies actually are performing investments. In other words, they will, turn around a profit. Um, and so the South Korean government, on behalf of the South Korean taxpayers, wants to make sure that it has some say over how the money is going to be invested and how these investments are going to be implemented, what kind of operations will be developed as a result. On the other hand, that is actually not the vision of the Trump administration. The Trump administration actually, I think yesterday came out and they clarified that what they are seeing this $350 billion as a as a basically a lump sum that they can use in whatever way they want to develop the manufacturing infrastructure of the United States. So that is not necessarily, problematic for what the South Koreans are trying to do. But what is problematic is it places the South Korean government in the position of having to just fork over $350 billion to another country with absolutely no say-so over how that money is going to be used. No country does that. Um, and what we have come to understand is behind the symmetry and the pageantry of Lee's um, visit to Washington, the South Korean, you know, um, the South Korean negotiators on these issues, Kim Young and his counterpart, Treasury Secretary Luton, they actually at some point were just yelling at each other. I mean, the negotiations were just acrimonious, and this is, I think, one of the reasons why there was no joint statement between the two leaders at the end of the summit, because the parties were not able to come to any kind of agreement on how this money was to be used. Um, This is also very much true of the deal that the Japanese negotiated with the United States. It's almost the same deal, except the dollar amount is different. It's $550 billion for the Japanese, but it's the same situation where Trump is saying we're going to take this money from Korea and Japan and other countries, and we're going to develop a special fund to be used any way we see fit to develop our infrastructure. And the Japanese are saying, no, 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 no. We This money is actually being backstopped by the Japanese public. We need to have a say on how that's going to be used. So these issues are still going to be fought over. And there has not really been a uh, meeting of the minds on this. I will say that a federal circuit court has ruled that Trump's tariffs are illegal, that the president has overstepped his powers in arbitrarily, essentially blackmailing these countries with tariffs to get them to come to the table. But the court did not roll back the tariffs. The court set a date in October, by which time the Trump administration will probably appeal the federal court's decision, and it may or may not go to the Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court does not take it up, this is pretty disastrous for Trump's tariffs policies and a boon for everyone who has scraped whatever money they can come up to get the tariffs reduced. But this is something that remains to be seen. So I think that nevertheless, this whole issue of the money and how it's to be used is very emblematic of the bullying kind of nature that Trump has taken towards its allies, particularly South Korea and Japan, and what the Lee administration will still be dealing with for many months to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. We'll hear next from Youngmi. Just turn it over.
Thank you, Cassie, and nice to meet you all. I'm Youngmi. First of all, I would like to sincerely thank you for having me to this meaningful webinar. I look forward to having a meaningful conversation with all of you. This year marks the 80th anniversary of Korea's liberation and the beginning of the history of division. The Korea still bears a shadow of war, and although the new Lee Jae-myung administration has taken office, there are numerous challenges both domestically and internationally that needs to be addressed. Amid these circumstances, the South Korea, the U.S. summit was held, and various evaluation has emerged. Just before the summit, there were significant concerns due to the President Trump's SNS post about purges and revolutions. But Trump dismissed this is fake news, supported President Lee Jae-myung, and called him a great leader, promising full U.S. support. President Lee Jae-myung is regarded as having excelled on the diplomatic stage with the U.S. during the summit. It is seen as an important opportunity to normalize the uncertain South Korea-the U.S. relationship and strengthening cooperation not only in alliance, but also in economic and industrial sectors. However, given Trump's uncertainty and political vulnerability, some see this summit as just the beginning. Nonetheless, it is also recognized as significant for creating an opportunity for North American negotiations. Additionally, as Paul already mentioned, today marks China's Victory Day, and there has been an active exchange between South Korea and China. In particular, the visit of National Assembly Speaker Woo Won-sik and other members of the National Assembly, along with North Korea leader Kim Jong Un, visit to China, are attracting attention. This is an important attempt to alleviate geopolitical tensions and conflict in the Korean Peninsula and East Asia. but military tensions remain difficult to resolve. President Lee Jae-myung asked Trump to focus on improving relationship with North Korea, emphasizing that he would serve as a pacemaker. While some have positively evaluated this, others have criticized it as an excessive flattery. However, this can be interpreted as President Lee Jae-myung's broader vision to ease tensions on the Korean Peninsula and in this region and build trust. The key is to clearly define his role as a pacemaker for a practical diplomatic perspective and to develop specific plans for this role. Nevertheless, North Korea continues to maintain a critical stance, and the rebuilding in the Korea relationship does not appear to be easy. North Korea strongly opposes military exercises such as South Korea-US joint drills, and building trust between the North and South will likely require more time. During the summit, important issues were discussed, including military budget increases, the cost sharing of the US military presence in Korea, and South Korea, the US economic cooperations. But I would like to say that Trump is demanding that South Korea increase its defense spending to 3.8% of GDP and raise the defense cost sharing contribution from $1 billion to $10 billion. Additionally, there are demands to expand the US military activities beyond the Korean Peninsula, including to Taiwan and other regions, which reflects the US intention to strengthen military cooperation with South Korea. The Lee Jae-myung administration will mark its 100-day milestone on September 16. The administration has made significant diplomatic achievement both domestically and internationally, including in relations with major powers, East Asia diplomacy, and bilateral diplomacy. It has also advanced bilateral relationship between South Korea and China and South Korea and Japan, as well as trilateral relations between South Korea, China, and Japan. However, key issues remain unresolved, such as military budget increases, US military cost sharing, and the strategic flexibility of the US military in Korea. These remain significant challenges and continuous discussions and cooperation, particularly within the international community and in the US are necessary. I recently attended a regional consultation on financing peace, which was jointly organized by the Asian Pacific Forum on Women, Law and Development, PeaceMOMO, and the Korea Center for United Nations Human Rights Policy. The consultation addressed the issue of the world military spending, reaching record highs every year. We discussed how the arms race is undermining human rights and sustainable development. And I particularly realized that the need of international efforts to resolve this, especially for women and children who are disproportionately affected by the arms race. Military spending worldwide has been increasing year after year. In 2024, the global expenditures reaches $2,781 billion with the European increasing military spending by 17% from 2023 and the Middle East by 15%. The US is responsible for the largest share of global military spending, and the top 5 countries, China, Russia, Germany, India, and the US, account for over 60% of total military spending in the world. NATO countries collectively spend 55% of global military expenses, amounting to $1,506 billion. Moreover, all NATO member countries are increasing their defense budget. and 18 out of 32 NATO countries are spending more than 2% of their GDP on defense. At the 2025 NATO meetings, members agreed to increase defense spending to 5% of GDP. Military alliances are strengthening, and the development of the arms industry, along with the integration of advanced technologies, is making disarmament even more difficult. However, this arms race is not only harming human rights and democracy, but it is also accelerating climate crisis. These most affected by this arms race are women and children. Therefore, it is imperative for us to break the vicious cycle of the arms race and dedicate more effort toward peace building activities and financial support for peace. This is an essential, significant challenge for those participating in this webinar from the US side. I believe that peace is a process, and in the context of this process, structural violence and inequality in systems and institutions need to be addressed. I believe that Americans should take the lead in improving the current situation where democracy has become institutionalized but is increasingly undermined by extremism. In today's world, where extremism persists, the democracy seems to remain only in name. There is a pressing need to active efforts embed peace in everyday life and to expand these efforts, especially among young people, particularly in American society, which is intertwined with the arms race and war industry. There needs to be more reflection on ethical responsibility and on how US government decisions impact the world and global society. To achieve peace for all rather than for a few, the active efforts of both individuals and communities are essential. So we are facing numerous challenges due to the US military influence and the US-China conflict. So we must focus on creating spaces for justice and peace and work towards specific alternatives that can help bring peace through collective foundations. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Youngmi. And just a reminder to all our attendees, after Dae-Han presents, we'll have some Q&A. So please feel free to think about the remarks and add some questions into the chat or the Q&A function, and we'll moderate those after we wrap up with these remarks. So on to you, Dae-Han.
Hello, hi. Thank you for having me here. Yeah, basically, I just wanted to talk about how are we to understand Lee Jae-myung and his summit with Donald Trump. And I think to start off, we just, we have to start with the fact that the disgraced president Yoon Suk-yeol, that he set the bar very low for Lee, right? Compared to him, President Lee Jae-myung appears brilliant and progressive, right? Given all of Yoon's various international gaffes, right? Koreans must have breathed a sigh of relief when the far more competent Lee took the global stage at such a delicate moment. And furthermore, after Yoon's anachronistic attempt to return South Korea to the days of military coups, simply returning to a limited formal democracy, as Lee is attempting to do, appears progressive. But Lee is not a progressive. His actions, and even by his own words, he is a conservative, and above all, he's a pragmatist. Nonetheless, given the connections between Trump's MAGA movement and the Korean far-right support of Yoon's self-coup, many people, in particular the far-right, expected, and some of them even hoped, that Lee would have a Zelensky moment. Instead, he had an Abe moment, right? The late Japanese Prime Minister Abe Shinzo has been referred to as a Trump whisperer, right? As such, his summit meeting with Trump was evaluated positively by the Korean public. His approval ratings went up by 3% to 59%, while his disapproval ratings fell by 5% to 30%. And while the great sycophancy displayed by Lee was part of his pragmatic diplomacy, the Trump Lee summit was also a reflection of a newly intensified imperialism, what the Tricontinental Institute for Social Research terms hyper imperialism, that is personified in Trump. Like an emperor, Trump bullies the world into coming to him bearing gifts and tribute, which Lee happily obliged them with. Once again, except for a few countries that stood up to Trump's tariff war, much of the world set the bar low in simply bowing to Trump's demands. So, what then was the significance of the Trump Lee summit? In many regards, Trump and Lee, with their pragmatism, provide both opportunity and crisis. Despite Trump's no deal in the 2019 Hanoi summit, he is the only US president, after President Bill Clinton, to break free from the neoconservative dogma of pressuring North Korea and hoping for its collapse. Trump actually indulged the possibility of rapprochement and even a recognition of North Korea as a nuclear state, something which to North Korea has become a minimum security guarantee. And of course, just a long list of countries attacked by the US for not having nuclear bombs, i.e., Iraq, Libya, and more recently, Iran, points to the reality that in a world of US unilateral aggression, when you have the bomb, you don't get bombed. It's also important to note that to Trump, peace in the Korean Peninsula is not about world peace, but about self interest. After all, if one of Trump's motivations is MAGA, the other is self aggrandizement, which he would achieve if, in a twist of irony, he won the Nobel Peace Prize for actually ending wars. Of course, even as Trump's unconventional negotiation and engagement style creates openings, its erratic nature also provokes crisis. As regards to President Lee, it is difficult to see him as having a traditionally progressive stance on peace and security in the Korean Peninsula. After all, if half of his foreign policy appointees, the Minister of Unification and the Director of the National Intelligence Service, are part of this progressive camp, the other half, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Director of the National Security Office, are pro US conservatives. The approach Lee takes in any moment is determined by what is politically convenient. We can see Lee's comments about Trump being the peacemaker and him being the pacemaker as coming from the pro US part. And this stance towards inter Korean relations stands in contrast to the Moon administration that framed North Korea's role in creating the conditions, or framed South Korea's role in creating the conditions for the US's engagement with North Korea. And for all of us that have been following the dynamics between liberal South Korean Democratic Party presidents and conservative US Republican ones, we might simply suppose that Lee has found a way to dance with Trump in the longer dance that will pave the path for goodwill and facilitate the US's rapprochement with North Korea. After all, plenty of ink has been spilled about how previous liberal Korean presidents alienated conservative US presidents and resulted in a stalled peace process. And President Lee might have indeed planted the seeds of goodwill that might later result in cooperation with North Korea. And of course, when those opportunities for peace and rapprochement arise, progressive movements for peace must support them. However, we must also understand that growing, growing multipolarity also offers paths towards peace other than simply placating the United States, as Paul mentioned. Right? Much as this is reflected in North Korea's shift from peace in the Korean Peninsula as a way to safeguard security towards building alliances with Russia and China. If yesterday North Korea has sought to make peace with the bully, and finally gave up after a long road of broken promises. Today, it appears to have joined the gang for self-protection. In fact, the US-led sanctions against North Korea are proving ineffective as Russian food and oil flow freely into it. And ultimately, it's unclear how many allies Trump will alienate through his intensified imperialism, right? In many regards, Trump is accelerating a process towards multipolarity, which will create different openings and different conditions for peace and stability in the Korean Peninsula. So, what must progressives and those fighting for peace do in this political conjunction? While we must exploit all the opportunities and openings that Trump and Lee might create or bring about, we can't simply hold our breath as we wait for them to bring peace in the Korean Peninsula or the region. We must continue demanding an end to the war exercises that destabilize security in the region. We must continue demanding an end to the military spending that not only drives an arms race in the region and the world, but as Youngmi mentioned, also diverse efforts and resources away from dealing with the existential threat of climate change. And we must fight for more equal UN-based global order where the US cannot simply attack countries at will. And of course, none of this can be given by Trump or achieved by Lee. I want to end by recalling the final scenes of Guillermo Pontecorvo's 1969 movie Burn. In the final scene, the captured black general of a failed uprising speaks with the black soldier escorting him. When the young soldier suggests that the general cooperate, since perhaps after a while maybe they will free you, the general responds, "No, little soldier, it doesn't work like that, friend. If a man gives you freedom, it is not freedom. Freedom is something you alone must take." Likewise, our peace and liberation must be won through struggle. To struggle, we must build our movements in solidarity with others as we raise our banners for peace and justice for ourselves and for the future. For us, one such moment would be the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum that's happening in South Korea from October 30th to November 1st. As the global economy center of gravity gathers to discuss AI, aging societies, and how to restore the global value chains, we're convening an international forum to discuss peace, sustainabilities, and alternatives to the current global order and corporate centered economies. And with that, I conclude my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Dae-Han. Thank you to all the speakers, and thank you also for the audience members who are already submitting very thoughtful questions. So the first question I'll turn to Paul. So roughly the themes being situating us in historical context, how this summit compares to prior summits between US and ROK leaders and US and North Korean leaders. In the past decade, so much has changed, both US, South Korea and US, North Korea, and then of course between the two Koreas. A stark moment marking this change was last January when the DPRK demolished the Arch of Reunification, announcing their change in policy, a stance recently reiterated by Kim Yo-jong, Kim Jong Un's sister. However, in his Liberation Day address, Lee Jae-myung stated he wanted to return to the 2018 military agreement with North Korea. So can you share with us your reflections on how this recent summit compared to the past summits between US and Korean leaders, and if such a return to the 2018 era of diplomacy is possible? And I'll also incorporate here two questions from the audience that are related. One audience member asked if you see Lee Jae-myung taking a line as soft as Moon Jae-in's regarding negotiations about USFK, US versus Korea. And another question where it was a reflection on South Korean sovereignty, and that even China gave in to a degree to the US tariffs and is in a comparably, some would say, more advantageous position compared to South Korea in relation to US. And so how can South Korea chart its own sovereignty moving forward?
um, I think as far as the prospects for this summit turning into something positive for peaceful unification, the two leaders have doubled down on this denuclearization demand that they've had, which is problematic. After the Hanoi summit fell apart in 2019, the Kim Jong Un said, "Well, we'll give the United States a year, to see if it wants to come back to the table." And then when the Biden administration came into power, they took the position that essentially we're going to pursue the denuclearization of the peninsula and also essentially the peaceful reunification of the peninsula um, based on a liberal regime coming into power in North Korea, essentially a regime change kind of formula. So I think that when the North Koreans hear that South Korea wants to go back to the way things were before, they're thinking, well, we had this agreement with Moon Jae-in, all these things we were going to implement, but when the United States and the UN command told Moon Jae-in, no, you can't do that, then nothing really of any substance moved forward. So I do think that Lee Jae-myung understands um, that the United States and North Korea have to come to terms with each other before anything moves forward. I also think that this desire on the part of the US and South Korea to pursue denuclearization, that is something that for many, many years, or the last 4 years, has continued to be the drumbeat. But what is different now is when you have Kim Jong Un and Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin, standing on a podium together, you know that Kim Jong Un is not going to be in China today unless he is assured that both China and Russia are on board with his terms of that Korea is now a nuclear state, and that is that. So I think like that, if anything, should provide impetus to the United States and South Korea to accept that the denuclearization path is a non-starter at this point, then nothing will. But that is where it is. But as far as Lee Jae-myung's position to play the pacemaker role as opposed to the peacemaker role, I don't think that's necessarily the role of a South Korean president. I mean, it might seem that way because you can't do anything really without US consent. But for example, when Lee Jae-myung in his Liberation Day statement said that we're going to accept the North Korean social system as it is, I think that sort of stands out in my mind as being, a step forward from what his predecessors have said. But I think that the North Koreans aren't really going to care about what South Korea thinks about a social system. But the one thing that the North Koreans, I think, do care about is the article in the South Korean Constitution, which establishes the entire peninsula as being the territory of the Republic of Korea. Now, Lee Jae-myung has said that he's going to make constitutional changes. If he took that article out, there's no way that North Korea could not go, huh, aha, because what it does is it opens the door for the two countries to actually sit down and negotiate their boundaries. It means an acceptance of a new status quo on the Korean Peninsula, but it also brings forth the possibility of peaceful coexistence between these two states. Um, At the same time, I think it would be a very subtle way of saying to the United States, um, well, this is kind of a new direction for us, but everybody in Washington is going to be unpacking it. What does this mean? North Korea is no longer part of the territory of South Korea. What is the fight about anymore? And what are the ramifications for the future military alliance between? So in a very gentle way, it sort of broaches a whole other set of questions. So I think like it would be a very difficult thing to change that thing in the Constitution because domestically, I think it would just freak the right wing out. But on the other hand, for a South Korean uh, president to take the position that he can't do things to make peace, I don't think South Korean people should accept that. they should demand that he does. And there are things that he can do. So, give him that support and pressure to do it. As long as the Trump administration is making unreasonable demands on South Korea, demands that they cannot possibly, meet, the more and more it is important for, South Korean society as well as the government to reevaluate its relationship with the United States and consider the possibilities of taking a different path on the international scene. So I can't remember. What was the other part of the question from the?
Well, I think you actually covered all of the ground, and there's so much you shared, and so I also want to share with Youngmi and Dae-Han, but first turning to Youngmi, opportunity to respond to some of what Paul said, especially about the call to South Korean constitutional language change and thinking about political openings for the Democratic Party or for the Minjudang. But I did also want to bring in gender and thinking about feminism and as you so brilliantly outlined, militarism and global military spending on the rise, and the intersection with masculinity. And we saw with Yoon's election, it was a notably anti-feminist campaign, and he gutted the Ministry of Gender Equality. But just because Yoon is gone, it clearly does not mean anti-feminism in South Korea is gone. And we've seen reports of the rising generation of so-called angry young anti-feminist men who are being radicalized. We've referenced the rising far right throughout this program tonight. And we've also seen recent reports that South Korea's military membership has had a notable dip in enrollment, which analysts are tracing back to South Korea's low birth rate, which is one of the, if not the lowest in the world. So I'm wondering if you can reflect on the state of gender and politics in South Korea and the role that women and feminists must play in ensuring that any peace brokered between any world leader is a true feminist peace. And there's also a question in the audience comments, which you feel free to integrate, but they ask also about your comment that peace is essential for development. And so how can we ensure that the current in military industrial complex system is transferred to the people? And I think with that, thinking about the role of feminists and feminist peace.
Thank you very much for your question. Women and feminists in both South Korea and the US play a crucial role in ensuring that any peace brokered between world leaders is a true feminist peace. In South Korea, the rise of anti-feminist sentiments and backlash against feminism, and particularly under President Yoon administration, reflect the challenges posed by militarism and traditional masculinity. The women and feminists are working to dismantle the militarized patriarchy, which limits both men and women by enforcing rigid gender roles, particularly through mandatory military conscriptions. In the US the feminist peace organization like Women Cross DMZ have historically critiqued the military industrial complex and the country's interventionist policies. Feminists advocate for a demilitarized approach to peace and pushing for global cooperation and gender justice and economic equality. And their work, the challenges militaristic patriarchal system that perpetuated conflict and inequality. A key framework for ensuring feminist peace is UNSCR 1325, which marks its 25th anniversary this year. This resolution underscores the importance of women's participation in peace processes and gender-sensitive approaches to conflict preventions and protection of women's rights during the after conflict. This anniversary of UNSCR 1325 serves as a powerful reminder that lasting peace can only be achieved when women are fully integrated into peace-building efforts, ensuring the gender equality and human rights are at the heart of peace agreement. Some countries have taken the idea to heart by implementing feminist voting policies. And as I know that since 2017, um, the U.S. have the U.S. government approved the Women, Peace and Security Act, which aims to promote women's inclusion in peace and security efforts as well. So all of the countries has to make an effort to achieve the peace with the women's participation in peace processes. And then regarding the question, I think that the government needs to increase transparency in military spending and military industrial complex. People should know where their money is going and in as well. The state sometimes provides funding to defense contractors with low profit margins. So certain companies in particular expanded their defense sectors with the government support. This is closely tied to taxation policies and the state level of transparency. However, the defense industry also involves the taking of human rights, especially in countries in the global south and the conflict zone. So, for instance, one company is known for selling to another country very low prices, but it is really crucial that we recognize the profound impact these connections have on human rights and their peace and work towards improving them as well. So I think that this is really important thing to know each other. And the second, by cutting military spending and investing the money into areas like education, healthcare, and social welfare, and also climate crisis as well. So civil society has to have a more bigger voices, allowing them to have more opportunity to share their views on defense policies. And also, we needed to create a sustainable or responsible government and a society that embrace diversity and ensure the rights of all people requires the efforts of everyone to resolve the diverse social, economic, and political issues we face and continuous solidarity and cooperation are necessary because we are all connected. We are all, yeah, so our acts affects each other. So that's why we needed to develop our solidarity together. Thank you.
Thank you, Youngmi. That actually leads perfectly into my next question for Dae-Han, which, talking about transparency of military spending, as I mentioned at the top of the program, Congress coming back from August recess is set to vote on the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, which is setting aside military spending for it is restricting the use of any military spending to accomplish the transfer of wartime operational control from the US to South Korea. And it is also restricting any spending on reducing the number of US troops that are currently based in South Korea. And so I want to talk to you about, I think, how you're thinking through advocacy and transnational solidarity, because another thing that we witnessed while Lee Jae-myung was here in the States is that he visited the Philadelphia Hanwha shipyard. And as Paul referenced earlier, there's this bid to, quote, make American shipbuilding great again, and Lee Jae-myung's plan to invest billions in U.S. shipbuilding and it proffering as an exchange to lower tariffs. So how are you thinking through building transnational solidarity, given all of the both openings and shortcomings of Lee Jae-myung's approach? And then, of course, what we're confronting with Donald J. Trump.
I guess I think partly is that like with shipbuilding, right? It's like connected to the U.S. military projection around the world. Like there's a lot of things that appear to just on the surface, oh, it's shipbuilding, oh, AI, right? But in fact, they have completely like dual purposes, like connected to the military. And I applaud and welcome people that bring up that issue, right? That are critical, that protest it, right? Because in fact, what it does is it shines a light in something that is just the government is trying to just gloss over. Oh, it's just shipbuilding. Oh, it's just AI, right? Oh, it's just like space exploration, right? As opposed to like understand that like South Korea is going to spend all this money putting satellites into space, into a space program to partake in Trump's Golden Dome program, right? It's just there's a lot of I suppose in that regard, uh, I think one of the important things is that we don't just simply dismiss Trump and Lee, in my opinion. I think they will open up, create opportunities, and but at the same time, we don't just engage with them uncritically, right? We engage with them, we exploit the opportunities that arise. And I don't necessarily think that the movement all has to have one voice, right? You could have people that are putting much stronger demands that are perhaps not possible to put out like in South Korea. So maybe you have an organization in the United States putting out demands on the US that from a South Korean perspective, like would be difficult, right? Because of like, public reaction or whatnot, right? So I think one important thing is just to be able to have different voices, like a chorus of voices, right? And at the same time, we do have to have these kind of exchanges and conversations, right, that are transnational, right, to understand how we're looking at a situation and what constraints our actions, and how you're looking at the situation, what constraints or what opportunities that you have, right, to be able to dialogue and build a stronger movement that is beyond just within Korea or within the United States, that is like that crosses both boundaries. And I guess the other thing that I wanted to do was we also need to draw connections, like I think Paul was doing, to what is happening in the global south and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. A lot of the world is changing, I think in like when much later in our lives, we will look back and we will say this was a historic moment that was having seismic shifts globally. And so I think what it means to achieve peace in Korea, it can change. And in many regards, Trump is changing the conditions for it by accelerating multipolarity, by his like hyper imperialism, right? And I guess the other thing, I just wanted to make a comment on Paul's thing, or I just wanted to add a little something. And I think the fact that denuclearization for North Korea is off the table, I guess I kind of wanted to explain a little bit or elaborate on what that means, because some people would be, then what is North Korea offering, right? And I think many people don't realize that beyond just having a nuclear bomb, there's many more stages to it, right? There's how many ICBMs do you have, right? Are you able to put your nuclear bombs into ICBMs that could reach continental United States, right? Are you going to build submarine based, uh, you know, like basically missiles launched from submarines that are like impossible to detect, right? So there's like multiple levels of this, and I think North Korea is basically saying like, look, there we want you to recognize us as a nuclear armed state, because we just seen the reality. We just see all around us people getting attacked and destroyed uh, because they don't have the nuclear bomb, right? But we will pause our program, right? We will not develop it any further, right? Which is something of substance, right? So I guess I wanted to clarify that.
Thanks, Dae-Han. We are actually right on time. I think we have a minute left, and so I'll just give opportunity for all speakers if you want a final word, any call to action, and how to follow any work of your organization. So start with Paul. Is there anything you want to leave off with, and how we can follow KPI's work? You're muted still, so yeah.
You can follow KPI's work on our website, kpolicy.org. In particular, I want to point out the End the Korean War Teaching Initiative, collective of young, I wouldn't say young, but budding scholars, Korean American scholars, have developed this a syllabus on the Korean War, which is far-ranging, covers numerous issues. So I would urge you to take a look at that and also follow what Dae-Han is doing and Youngmi is doing on with their respective programs. That's
Thanks.
all I'll say. Yeah.
Thanks, Paul. Youngmi, for PeaceMOMO or for your work in particular?
Yeah, PeaceMOMO is a Seoul-based organization engaged in peace research and education and advocacy. And we are focusing on the AI militarization, its convergence with a nuclear weapon, and also the division aiming to transform network that reinforce division and militarize attention into ones that cultivate peace. And also we are focusing on that Northeast Asia common security agenda. And we have some kind of a campaign, peace as commons. So peace is all, and then nobody left behind for peace decision making. And also we are working some of the networking with other NGOs and women's organizations too. So we will continue to work for peace movement. So please let me know if you have any questions regarding the PeaceMOMO, and then you can find the Google link as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Youngmi. Dae-Han?
Yes. Yeah, I'll put my the email for the IAC as well as our Instagram, which we're fairly active in our website, in the chat. So please look out for that. We're organizing for the APEC, the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum, that's happening from the 30th to from October 30th to November 1st. And I think this, just given that it's APEC contains um, the global economy center of gravity. It's a very important moment, and I think the moment is more than just APEC, right? I think the it speaks to kind of like the Cold War that is happening. It speaks to like the environmental destruction that is happening. It speaks to like the military Keynesianism that a lot of developed countries are using to try to emerge out of um, out of their economic stagnation, as opposed to like a green transition that is required for ourselves and for the future generations, right? So in some regards, for the APEC moment, we want to expand it and make it much bigger than just about APEC, right? So we're looking for volunteers. We're looking for people that speak Korean and English, or just anybody that, in fact, that is interested in helping out. And yeah, and of course, translation stuff can also be done online. So yeah, I'll just put my information. So that's just kind of my plug. Thank you.
Thanks, Dae-Han. And you can always follow Women Cross DMZ's work at, we're on Instagram, X, and our website, and join our newsletter. I'm very, very grateful to all of the panelists. I also want to give a big thanks to Solby Liem, Women Cross DMZ's communications coordinator, who has been doing so much work behind the scenes. I know anyone who's run a webinar knows tech is no mean feat. So a lot of gratitude to her. Thank you to all on this on this webinar who are organizing in all of your various corners. As Youngmi and as everyone on this panel agrees, peace is a collective effort. And so we all have our part to play. So thank you all. Thank you. Have a good night or day, wherever you're calling in from. Bye-bye.